morning, everyone. Welcome to Life Sciences Grade 12. My name is Tutuzi Bupeg. I'm sorry about that. And we are discussing evolution by natural selection. We started the topic yesterday and then we went through different opinions and views about how people believe about natural selection or evolution, rather, according to Darwin's theory. Ne? So, these are the questions based on the work we did yesterday. You can ponder on it, discuss it with your friends or classmates. Just think on it. Ne? 1. Read each of these viewpoints. These are the viewpoints we went through yesterday. Which of these viewpoints best describes how you personally feel about the origin of life on Earth at this stage? Also, say if you do not agree with any of these viewpoints and explain why you are happy with your viewpoint. And then 2, have you read articles, a book, or watched a video or TV program on the theories and ideas people have about the origin of life on Earth? What did it communicate? Are there opposing points of view? And then question 3, would you say that evolution is a scientific fact or simply a theory that can be proven wrong? And then question 4, have a class discussion in which all learners explain their point of view. Write a critical paragraph in which you substantiate your point of view and then use any credible information provided by the class. So this would be a great class activity, or think on these ideas and then we'll discuss it one day. All right. Fossil records now. Remember we said you can study, you can get evidence of evolution through fossil records. That's one of the ways. But what are fossil records? Fossil records are fossils are the preserved remains. These are bones and teeth or impressions, for example, footprints of organisms that lived in the past. So this involves, when, now let's go check it out, actually. It's more fun when we go Google together. Should I share the screen? Oh, let me share the fossil records, fossils. There are images of the fossil records. We have different types here. You see here, these were found on these rocks, on the sand here as well. Then these are prints. You see the prints that are left on these rocks, so they've been there for quite some time. Then look at this bone structure. There's a lot of them. It's amazing, really. You see here, we have a lot of fossil records here. There are prints here. These are bone structures, prints of the bone structure, Learning from all of this, when you go study all of this, it can help us trace and find out their origins. Because these are organisms that lived in the past, and by studying their bones and their teeth and then the footprints, we can be able to work out how they originated and even link them up to organisms that are still present to this day. By studying fossils, paleontologists can develop a good understanding of past life forms. So you'd be wanting to study and understand the past life forms, and then you can find similarities between the past life forms and the ones we have at the present day. An interesting example is the horse, which is Equus species. Modern horses evolved from a much smaller ancestor named the Hyracotherium species. This animal lived about 40 million years ago. Hyracotherium species was about the size of a big dog and lived in woodlands. You see, big dog, that's the keyword. This is a horse species. This here is a horse, like we've mentioned here. Right now we call it the ish. Okay, may highlight my pen. Modern horses evolved from this smaller ancestor. Their smaller ancestor was the high Rhycotherium species. So all horses we have today, they originated from this species. And this one, their ancestor, was about the size of a big dog. Now look at the present day horse. Compare it with a dog that you currently have. The dog that you have, the biggest dog that you can see now, a big dog, is the ancestor of this modern day horse. Do you realize the differences there? They are so great. Modern horses are larger than their ancestors and also only have one toe on each foot compared to Hyracotherium's 4 toes. So if you were ever to be asked the differences between the modern horse and the ancestral horse, you know, you'd start with the toes and the size, body size. Body size is a Hyracotherium was the size of a big dog, whereas the modern horse is the size that it is, it's way bigger. And then the modern horse only has one toe on each foot, but the Hyracotherium had 4 toes. Paleontologists have collected a number of fossil remains of different species of animals that are intermediate forms between Hyracotherium species and the modern horse Equus species. So that's the job of paleontologists. They've collected all these different fossil remains and intermediate forms so that they can compare these two species. Remember when we spoke of, right now we speak of different species, and that's what we've mentioned, what happens with evolution. Over time, as the organism adapts to the changing environments, it will change its own body structure until it develops into a new species. That's why now we are speaking of the modern day horse, which is the Equus species, but its ancestor was the Hyracotherium species. That speaks to evolution. It has evolved so much that it has even changed to becoming a different species. How then do scientists determine the age of fuels, of fossils, my bad? Through radioactive isotopes, which are also called radioisotopes. Those are present in a rock and provide a good way of determining the age of a fuel. So radioisotopes are present in rocks, and they can study them to find out the age of a fossil. The age of a fossil is estimated by measuring the proportions of the original radioisotope and the non-radioactive form. So these would be, you measure the proportions based off the original one versus the non-radioactive form. So you compare the two and you can work it out. The oldest fossils of organisms that scientists have found so far are estimated to be about 3.5 billion years old. Do you understand this number here? 3.5 billion years old. And that means, that tells, it's very telling of how the earth has evolved over those many years. And also how earth is so powerful in that it can preserve things for so long. These rocks remain microfossils that resemble bacteria that still exist today. So these rocks that I found, they contain those microfossils. So fossils aren't limited to big or macroorganisms. Even a bacteria, you see that it contains microfossils that resemble bacteria that still exist today. Although the fossil record provides adequate evidence for supporting evolution, it also shows more missing links. So we get evidence, yes, but there are many missing links which still can't be explained. So there are many things you still can't explain with evolution. Although we still get enough evidence, there's a lot you can't explain. So there is the ancestor of our modern day horse. It was the Hyracotherium species, which is it was about 0.4 meters in height. You see, It indeed is like a dog, a big dog, 0.4 meters in height, and it had 4 toes. Those were 4 toes. And then this figure here is how do paleontologists know that the modern horse evolved from a much smaller animal called the Hyracotherium. So this is how they found fossil records. They first found the Hyracotherium and then they dated it back to that time and they studied its structure. Then after that developed what is the Mesohippus. Mesohippus was about 0.6 meters and it has three toes. This one had 3 toes. So the changes have started to happen. And then we have the Merychippus. Merychippus was 1 meters tall in height and it had about 3 toes still, but the other 2 started to be smaller. The 1 toe in the middle was the main one, and the others started becoming smaller. And you can see from the Mesohippus that it's starting to resemble the horse that we know today, except in height, of course. And this one seems to have a longer neck. I see, so the neck grew and developed. Then from the Merychippus, we have the modern horse, which is the Equus species. The Equus species is the one we see today. This is the 1 toe referred to. It is about 1.6 meters. So you see the changes that have occurred over the past centuries. It's a lot. 1.6 meters today from what was 0.4 meters. And if they were to go deeper and find out exactly, they'd find that they could even find the ancestor of the Hyracotherium, which would then probably be a much different structure. Ne? So these are records from fossils that have studied over years and years and years, and they learn to find out the differences in structure and so on and so forth. And then modification by descent. Modification by descent refers to the fact that genes are passed on from one generation to the next, and that genes are constantly changing. So that's what we mean by modification by descent. If these genes are passed on from one generation to the next, and that's what we know. We know for that for a fact. Genes are passed on from one generation to the next. I mean, parents would pass on their genes to their offsprings. That is a given fact. That's what we know. And then what happens then? These genes, as they are passed on from generation to generation, they are constantly changing. That is why you are not a photocopy image of your parents. So it's changing somehow, maybe just little by little. But as the generations go by, as you go deeper in the generations, then it would changes constantly. This can be explained by looking at the example of beetles. In this population of beetles, 90% of the beetles originally had the genes for a brown color, and only 10% had a gene that makes them green. So 90% had genes for brown color, but only 10% had a gene that makes them green. So you see, in this population, original, 90% brown color, and only 10% green. And then a few generations later, the green beetles are more common than they used to be. Why? Because as the genes were passed down from generation to generation, it changed. They constantly changed. And that is why you see what was only 10% is now the common color that you find in beetles. Darwin, again, speaking to Darwin, the father of evolution, said that organisms undergo changes in order to adapt to the environment. If all mammals developed from a common ancestor, they should have certain characteristics in common. So we have different mammals, right? And because we are classified as mammals, meaning we evolved from a common ancestor, to prove that we should at least have certain characteristics that we have in common with each other, right? That we need to understand. This is a figure that explains here that how the beetles have evolved over time. We used to have about, yeah, 90%. Here in this image, it's showing you that you had only one, which is the 10%, which was green in color. What? I'm sorry about that. You had only one, which was green in color. Let me go highlight that one. This here, green in color, only 10%. And the whole 90% was brown in color. And then through the modification by descent over time, what happened? You ended up having more green than the brown. What actually happened here? As they mate. It means the green gene, when it matched with the brown one, it became more dominant as time went by. And that's why you see more of the green now than you see of the brown. And then the other way is what? Is through, remember we are discussing ways you can find evidence of evolution. We started with fossils, and now we are on biogeography. There's three actually. It's fossils, fossil record. We've got modification by descent, which you found, we've proven it now with the beetles and how they've changed over time. And then now we have biogeography. So whenever you're asked about forms or ways in which we provide evidence for evolution, you list those ones we are discussing currently. Biogeography, just to explain the fact that organisms look so different in different parts of the world. That's because of biogeography. It is also evidence for evolution. Biogeography explains that the organisms look different in different parts of the world. You can see that, and it goes back in time. When Darwin studied the organisms on the Galapagos Islands, he realized that the organisms resemble the species on the mainland of South America, but they all developed into new species. So yes, you will see some resemblances if you were to go to a different part of the world than where we are right now. You'd see probably species that resemble the ones we have, but somehow they're not really the same. It resembles it, but it's quite different in how it developed. And it has probably become a new species in the other side. They had developed into new species. Then Darwin realized that species tend to be more closely related to the species from the same area than to other species with the same lifestyle and form, but living in different areas. So an example, what can I say? If we have chances of an organism, it would be similar, it would develop, and it would be more closely related to species from the same area, as they are exposed to the same conditions in their environment. They are exposed to the same things. Even though there might be a species in a different part of the world or a different area from that one, which is similar to it, and even functions the same, has the same form, has the same lifestyle, but the resemblance wouldn't be so much given the fact that they're exposed to different environments. That's just one of the reasons. You know, when you have comparing organisms, or let's say birds, which are where in Africa, and birds in a different part of the world where it's very hot, where it's very cold rather, where birds in a part of the world that is very hot, birds in the part of the world that is very cold. Those two organisms are exposed to different conditions due to the different weather, different climates. So different climates there force them to develop and adapt to different conditions. So yes, they might have been originally the same species, but over time, due to the differences in the environments, they would then be different. So the ones from this one area would look closely related to each other than the ones from a different area. This happens with human beings too, and probably don't even notice much. But we have similar resemblances to people who are actually exposed to similar conditions. If you look at people who stay in a particular area, as opposed to people, let's say people who stay in the rural areas and people who stay in the urban areas and the suburbs. Yes, we are the same, but the conditions we're exposed to, that's why people would tend to develop differently. Just, it's not too noticeable. We can notice it more in animals than in humans. I don't know why, but yes. And then another one is genetics. The genetics can also be used as evidence for evolution. Similarities and differences in the biochemistry and molecular biology of various organisms provide evidence for evolution. Organisms owe the characteristics they have to their proteins. Proteins, as you remember, they consist of amino acids. Remember when we, in the previous grades, you have done the whole process of protein synthesis. We've even done it in first term. That's why we know that the proteins, they consist of amino acids. And this is determined by the sequence of nucleotides in their DNA and mRNA, as you saw earlier. Remember when we studied that DNA and mRNA are composed of nucleotides, and then the sequence of those nucleotides will determine what amino acid is produced. And the sequence of amino acids will determine which protein is formed. And then that's where those different proteins and their sequences in the different organisms are then the characteristics or the defining characteristics of the different organisms. Evidence that all life is related comes from the fact that all organisms have a genetic code that is almost identical. Nucleotides occur in threes, which we call codons, and this is true for all life forms. So, well, this is the evidence here, the genetics. This proves here that all life forms are identical, that all organisms, it's because all life forms are related. Why? Where did we get that idea? From genetics. Why? We all have the same nucleotides. Like remember, we have literally those 4 nucleotides, A, T, G, and C in a DNA sequence. All life forms have those 4 nucleotides. The difference is only in the sequence in those nucleotides. But all life forms have been studied and they've found to have just these 4 nucleotides. And that's amazing. We only have literally 4, like 4. But we have so many different structures and organisms which have resulted from only the 4 nucleotides. The main difference there is only in the sequence. So, like we've studied in genetics, you could have a sequence of A, T, let's say A, T, G, C, A, and then the other organism would have T, T, G, C, A. Look, there's only one difference here. But because of that one difference, it would cause a very big, huge difference in the structure of the nucleotide, in the structure of the nucleotides, in the structure of the amino acids, and the protein produced. This is amazing. This is mind-blowing, and I really love life sciences for this. And then why do organisms on the Galapagos Islands resemble the species on the mainland of South America? See, they resemble it, but they're exposed to different conditions. These are now images. And then any questions? If you have any questions, remember I provided my email address. You are more than welcome to send me an email and I will contact you. And then other forms of evidence for evolution, we have embryology. All vertebrate embryos have structures called pharyngeal pouches in their throat regions at some stage in their development. So this here you've studied when we did the reproduction and studying of the embryos. All vertebrate embryos have what? The pharyngeal pouches in their throat regions at some stage in their development. These embryonic structures develop into homologous structures with different functions. For instance, these structures develop into gills in fish and into the eustachian tubes that connect the middle ear with the throat in mammals. So these 2 different structures here right now that we see, they all started off the same. The gills in fish and the eustachian tubes eustachian tubes that connect the middle ear with the throat in mammals. These two are so different, yet they resulted from what? From the pharyngeal pouches in embryos. So whilst they're still embryos, they all have this structure. But because of the different organisms, they would then have different structures as they develop, as they differentiate then. So this is another form of evidence for evolution, which is embryology. You'd find a lot of evidence when you study embryos and you see how similar they are whilst they're still embryos. And it's amazing to see how they develop into different species. Literally, look at different embryos from different organisms. Let's go try and check it out. Embryology. Embryology of different species. Let's say of different uh, animals. Yeah, let's just start with different animals. Look, let's open this. Which one is more clearer? It's crazy. It's amazing. Look, yeah, I'm opening this image just. Ish. I want just the image, that one there. There. I can't enlarge it. Anyway, this one here. Look at how similar they are. All of them at the very top. They are very, very similar. Literally, it looks like it's the same species or organism, right? But look, this one, number one, is actually a fish. Number two is what? Can't say that name. It's the Totoka. Let's look at the fish one. This is a fish. There, the very last one, that's a human embryo. This here is the rabbit. This is a cat. This is a hog. This is a chick. It's crazy, guys. If you're actually to be given uh, these structures as embryos and you are asked to label or to identify whether or not to identify which organisms they would develop into, it would almost be impossible to work that out because they are so similar. So embryology is this is enough evidence. If that this doesn't show you that somehow we are related, then I don't know what will. Because look how different are human beings from rabbits or even from fish, yet their embryos literally look the same. So this is evidence that indeed organisms, all living organisms are they originate from the same ancestor. Two little bones in a developing reptile eventually form part of the reptilian jaw. The same two structures develop in the marsupial mammalian embryo, but in the later case, they develop into the anvil and hammer of the mammalian ear. So this is just proof or further evidence of embryology, which we can, like we've seen from the images, it's very interesting, it's exciting, it's amazing. I even have that image here. A scientist by the name of Haeckel developed a theory which was called ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. This means that during embryonic development, an organism goes through the same successive stages the species go through in its evolutionary development. Haeckel compared embryos of different animals and found they showed remarkable similarities, like we've just looked at now. The embryos show remarkable similarities. So to explain the three words, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Ontogeny is what? This is the sequence of events involved in the development of an organism. So the sequence of events that are involved in the development of an organism repeats the sequence of events involved in evolution of a species. So that's basically what this means. If you understand these terminologies and what they mean, then you understand what this phrase in full means. Ontogeny, sequence of events involved in the development of an organism. But phylogeny is the sequence of events involved in the evolution of a species. Species now involves a larger group as a main group, which has lots and lots of organisms within it. But this here is looking at just one organism. So if you're going to look at human beings, so you can look at the embryo sequence of events involved in the development of a human being. It repeats, it's similar to the sequence of events that are involved in the evolution of all species here, animal species. Yes, so that's what it means. And this, like I've just shown you now, this is what the theory of ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Recapitulates just means repeats. So ontogeny repeats phylogeny. Really simple English to help you remember. But again, there I've just shown you, these are the embryos of the different species, and then you see the fish again. Then you study it, you see it's the same structures. Yeah, this is the human. It's now different, right? Now you see, now when they are more developed in different stages of their development, you can clearly see the differences. But in the very, very beginning, oh, it's scary, actually. It's mind-blowing, to say the least. Okay, tomorrow we'll start off from this slide of anatomy, but we are still discussing the evidence of evolution. We'll start off from here tomorrow, ne? Thank you so much for your attendance. I will see you tomorrow, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Bye.